It's our pleasure to welcome now Professor Ron Rychlak, Distinguished Professor of Law, and Jamie L. Whitten, Chair of Law and Government. He's also the Faculty Athletics Representative at Ole Miss and is Secretary-Treasurer of the SEC Executive Committee. Good morning or afternoon there, Professor Rychlak. Good to see you, sir. Did we get all that right?
Good morning, Gerard. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Make sure I got all that right. Is that all current? Are you still Secretary-Treasurer?
There's been a change. 2 weeks ago, there was a rollover, and Chancellor Boyce is now president of the SEC Executive Committee. But there's only 7 members, and you can only have one from each institution. So after about 11 years, I've rolled off of the SEC Executive Committee just 2 weeks ago.
Okay. All right. Well, appreciate you updating on this. But I know you're been heavily involved in a lot of the activities and certainly in college athletics and more specifically SEC athletics in your role with the Executive Committee. But there's no doubt, Professor, that this advent of NIL has turned upside down college athletics, to say the least. I mean, that's putting it mildly. But now we have an NCAA NIL settlement, a lawsuit, that has a number of key provisions in it that is going to, I guess, perhaps create even more chaos, at least for a while in the system. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's going to take a little while for the compliance people to adjust and go from the process of keeping money away from the athletes to bring them together and looking at the new rules and such. But hopefully this will provide some stability, at least for a while, and trying to maintain competitive equity and fairness for the players and financial stability for the programs. Hopefully, because of the agreement that was worked out between the NCAA, the conferences, and the plaintiffs, this will provide some moment of peace.
Well, it's been the Wild West, it seems like, for a while, right? I mean, there really been almost no significant guidelines or rules or policies. The sky was the limit.
Well, the thing is that the state legislatures got into the act. They began with the process. They felt they were defending the rights of the student athletes. They began passing laws, some of which were in direct conflict with NCAA regulation. Well, the NCAA is a club, basically, and if the clubs are against the law, the club changes the rules to follow the law, and that's what they did. And it really opened up all kinds of you can call it problems or opportunities, but certainly a lot of different things were different once the laws began coming into effect.
Yeah, incredible. So let's do us a rundown here. There are now some caps put in place, right? Talk
there
about
are.
That.
Well, some of the changes that came into place. So this lawsuit, the House versus NCAA lawsuit, filed by a swimmer, Grant House, seeking a share of revenue for student athletes. Now, the revenue, it was agreed to that schools would be able to spend going forward up to $20.5 million per year of revenue share with existing athletes. As this is weighed across the different programs and such, there are a lot of issues there, whether is revenue share to be shared with sports that don't bring in revenue? And I think the consensus evolving is that no, those programs will not really significantly participate in revenue share. Football, men's basketball, some schools have baseball or women's basketball as revenue sports. They will be participating more significantly. But from the program's perspective, you think of Ole Miss or Mississippi State or Southern, any of the schools around that are going to get into this, they've got to figure out how to come up if they want to be competitive. And in the SEC, it's going to require this. In the SEC, so certainly for State and Ole Miss, they're going to have to spend $20.5 million of revenue share with their athletes. And that means they have to find that money either with cuts or with additional revenue coming in, additional revenue streams, just to maintain competitive balance across the conference.
So just to explain that maybe a little further, Professor, Right now, all that money goes into the kitty, essentially, and they run the athletic departments with that. But if that's going to be taken off the top and distributed out to players, that's $20.5 million less you got to operate the athletic department. Is that essentially right?
Yeah, you're running stadiums, you got employees, you got coaches, you got staffs, you got travel budgets, you got all that kind of stuff. And you got that not just in football. You might be, people tend to think about football down here, but for all of your programs, that's a lot of money to come out of a budget that, let's say, for the SEC, standard budgets might be 130 to 200 million total, and I think for State and Ole Miss, you're talking about 140, 150, whatever. That's more than 10% of their budget will suddenly be going to a new expense category, and they have to figure out how they cover that.
I mean, you're effectively adding a bunch of new employees without any additional sales and revenues. What you're doing here.
It's kind of what they're doing, but I will point out that we're trying. The NCAA is not acknowledging employee status. This is revenue share.
Okay.
Not
okay.
Just so we're clear about that.
Okay, understand. I'm just thinking from a business perspective.
Sure, of course.
I'm essentially increasing my payroll, if you will, whether or not they're employees. Certainly, it's just $20 million more of expenses that I didn't have before, and I got no additional revenue coming in from them. They're basically compelling through this, through this ruling that the schools will have to share. It's essentially what I call it revenue sharing.
This is actually a settlement, because had this gone to trial, they were looking at a violation of antitrust law, and that leads to triple damages. And so there was concern that it would have bankrupted both the NCAA and the conferences. So this is not imposed by a court as much as it's agreed to by the parties, and the court approved it.
So what do you think, Professor, that this ruling in this case, how might this affect outside of just this revenue sharing requirement that you got to just cough up $20 million to the athletes? What else is going to happen out of this? I'm thinking about some programs may just shut down.
Well, recognize schools don't have to spend that $20.5 million. The Ivy League, for instance, just opted out of that part of the settlement. Now, they're
okay.
I haven't talked about back damages. They're paying athletes going back 10 years, primarily by the NCAA handling that. But you can opt out, or you can play for part. You can say we're gonna share $8 million with our athletes, but we can't really afford 20.5.
Okay, I got you. So they got some latitude there. So I read something about even affecting regulation of NIL when you've got private companies perhaps that are funding, sponsoring an athlete, that there's some test they have to apply to make sure it's reasonable that Deloitte & Touche has been hired to do this. Is this right?
That's exactly correct. So what we've been talking about so far, you and I here, is revenue share. There's still the name, image, and likeness category, which comes on top of revenue share. Yeah. And the new thing that this and it kind of fits into where I said we're not going to be calling them employees, that it's revenue share, because the NIL money, which will come on top of that, they're going to have to justify any amount above $600 is going to go through an outside audit to make sure it really is about name, image, and likeness, and not paying players for playing.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, my gosh. What a mess that's going to be, because it's so subjective. I mean, unless they've got some sort of concrete algorithms and formulas they use, and I did see there's some of that in there, but it's still going to be subject to some opinion, I guess.
Well, it is. They have 12 factors, and you go through them, but it's probably not worth it. But the thing is, you're trying to, in essence, say, is this a fair market value for something where, at least currently, we don't have a market, and try and assess what would this really be worth in the real world. And there aren't that many pro athletes who have significant deals the way that a lot of college athletes do already.
Yeah. We got a break. If you can hang on, I want to share with you a few more questions I have about this, just some theories I have, and get your take on it. Can you hang with us?
Happy to.
Okay, well, great. We got Professor Ron Rychlak from the Ole Miss Law School, former member now of the SEC Executive Committee. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. We're visiting with Professor Ron Rychlak talking about this NIL settlement. So, Professor, I know that a minute ago I sort of equated the situation, the revenue sharing, to having a bunch of new employees. I've often wondered, Professor, just run this by you, and I've had this thought for years, long before we had NIL and all this stuff, other stuff that's going on, that's turning college athletics upside down. Are we headed for a period where universities, colleges will essentially outsource, maybe franchise their athletic operations to third-party private organizations, and just they're out of the athletics business, receive royalties from the private companies, the experience, everything looks the same. The players are, in fact, employees of the third party, not even required to be students in school?
Well, I think issues down that avenue have been talked about. I believe Kentucky's looked at it maybe harder than some other schools. I don't know that anyone's ever talked about them not being students, and I think that would be potentially a make or break level. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who said at that point they're minor league teams instead of school teams, and this guy I was talking to said, and I wouldn't care about them anymore. There is something about the being part of the school and part of the rah-rah. And the reason we have them is to build interest around the school. You know, in really no other nation has big-time sports associated with their universities the way they do in the United States. You wouldn't find this in Europe. And so it's a particularly unique situation. And I think those of us who work in and around it think it's worth preserving and trying to maintain the student-athlete ideal.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying I support it. I've just often thought as well, just my thoughts about higher education in general, that things are getting so specialized from an educational perspective. You experience this all the time, that you may want to pursue a particular course of study in a curricula. The university can't afford to have professors that can teach this wide range of subject matter, but you can have one, and maybe you could deliver that to 200 students across the world electronically. And so maybe it diminishes the brick and mortar aspect of higher ed.
Well, you're absolutely right. I will tell you, I mean, the corner of the law school where I work is basically the home for the one of the two centers in the world that really focuses on space law, the law that applies to matters in outer space. And they do more remote distance, they have got students around the world. And there are things and times that works with, and it works well with that National Remote Sensing Space Law Center that we have. I'm not sure that works well with football or baseball or basketball. I mean, those are inherently team constructs built upon a locality, and originally developed and designed kind of to attract the interest of young men to come to college and continue playing the games they love and get an education alongside of it.
Oh, I completely agree, and I didn't mean to conflate those two. I was just thinking about the disruptions that are occurring in higher ed in general, and how that might also figure into athletics somehow. Right? The schools themselves, and the basis for all of it is the education aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I think it could. Obviously, there's interesting times in higher education. We've got all kinds of issues, whether you like what's happening or not, now or whatever. There have been political issues that are around now, and they're influencing responses from governments. And I think it's necessarily always going to be a little bit that way, because universities are hotbeds of intellectual development. And we're going to have the people who have different ideas and want to argue and stress their points. And hopefully sports can be a chance for us to get away from those divisions and unify around something. Yeah. But it's been it's been very controversial for a decade or so itself now. So maybe we can settle down, not just in athletics, but on campuses across the nation.
Yeah, and we've enjoyed a strong enrollment in the universities in Mississippi, particularly at Ole Miss and Mississippi State, USM, et cetera. But across the country, we've seen a decline in enrollment. And I often thought that perhaps, Professor, and this is kind of off the subject of sports, but employers aren't as much concerned about the traditional linear degree as they once were. It may not be so much applicable in law, for example, but there are a lot of jobs that, I just need you to have these skills. I really don't care if you necessarily have a degree. You're seeing a lot of employers sort of change their policies in law in that respect.
Well, I think you've seen some universities change too, where we're offering some certificate programs. I actually teach in one for athletics administration, where you might be working your way up and you don't have your college degree, but you can take 2 classes and that'll really help you in your career. So universities are responding to that, I believe.
Okay. Well, I believe that's the case as well. I mean, it's maybe a situation where you either respond to those realities or you might not persist, right? You might not sustain, and that's the way the market works.
I will.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I will say here at Ole Miss we've been doing very well with enrollment. I mean, the school's been growing. There's some of us who've seen the campus grow and the city grow, the town grows so dramatically. You're starting to think it wouldn't be bad to maybe hold tight for a month or so, but it's great and love having students. I'm always encouraging students to come take a look at Ole Miss and when they do, they usually want to come here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would say that to some extent, Ole Miss's success with the increase for enrollment is at the expense of other institutions that are losing out on some of these students that are opting, especially with the big out-of-state enrollment.
Well, it is, and it's really tough for a lot of private institutions to survive in some of these scenarios, and where schools like Ole Miss are trying to put a small liberal arts college within the university itself, with our honors college and things like that.
Yeah. Well, how are things going at the law school in general?
Law school is doing well. We're bumping along. We've got a program in Cambridge. One of my colleagues, who's very involved in sports law, Will Berry, is teaching over there this summer, and we're looking at a really good enrollment. I've got a very good friend's daughter who's a very good student who 3 years ago would have been easily admitted, and we've got so many really outstanding applicants this year that she's on a wait list, and I'd love it if she got in, but we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean that is unusual to have a wait list, and so now I guess you've got a selection process to determine who makes it, right?
So we're drafting just like the coaches are drafting for their teams, I guess.
That's just amazing. But certainly things have changed. I think changed for the better. But this whole athletics world has just been totally upended. And you hear the fans that they're all over the map as far as their like or dislike for what's going on. I'm sure you've encountered that. When it's working and it's producing wins, they like it. But on the other hand, if it's not, well, we're paying all this money, we're not getting our money's worth. You know how that works. So you
got that, yeah. And we've got people with collectives and with sports betting and everything else who have particular investments who are really devoted to the team or to the victories anyway. And we had a really good year across the board in sports this year, by the way. So
yeah, absolutely. And I know you, I'm always privileged to come up and speak to your gaming law class. I'm just curious, Professor, where do those students, or do any of them stay in the gaming industry that take that class? We got about a minute left.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. Just yesterday, I had some folks from Nashville contact me about a case, and I said, well, we really need to talk to folks in the Gaming Commission. And so I pulled out my chart and looked around. A high number of my former students work for gaming commissions or work in law firms. I spoke to one a law firm who it's a significant, highly regulated industry that's very important in this part of the nation, and so it's
no doubt.
It's fun to watch them develop and grow.
Specialized practice for sure. Professor, always good talking to you, sir. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming on, and enjoy your insight and your perspective. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gerard. Look forward to having you up to class again this year.
Yes, sir. Folks, we're stepping aside for a break. Coming right back. Half an hour of Middays remains.